Hey guys, it's Matt Static, and I finally have a PS5, and to be honest, I could not be more happy to have the first game I play on this thing be the long-awaited, the masterpiece, the life-changing experience that is Astro Bot. This game is so fucking fun. This isn't the first time you've heard it, and it won't be the last, but God of War Ragnarok is really good. Too good, in fact. I thoroughly enjoyed the last game, and Ragnarok manages to be a fulfilling sequel, continuing what 2018 started while standing on its own merits. Though I will say, I've been seeing a lot more criticism for this game than I originally expected. I mean, it's mostly been getting praise on top of praise, but more and more people have been expressing their distaste for the direction that Ragnarok and the genre of game in general has been taking. Now, I've seen this group of players for a while now, and I usually just chalk it up to these games not really being their thing. And you know, when it comes to personal preference, it's perfectly okay to be wrong. But after playing through it, while I still can't relate at all, I can definitely understand where this problem with the genre is coming from, and it's because of this game specifically. Let me say right now, God of War 5 Ragnarok is a masterpiece. You know the game's good when my sleep schedule isn't. But if these type of games are gonna keep coming out, especially in the case of the next God of War, then it would, be kinda nice to see these issues have some kind of workaround. They aren't big enough to really hurt the experience, but they're more like cracks in the design that could end up making them dull. It was probably with The Last of Us that this type of game really took off and started taking over. This genre of game I've been referring to doesn't actually have a proper name, at least not one that I know of, but most people just kind of brand it the PlayStation exclusive. Doesn't even have to be exclusive sometimes, we'll just call it that. A lot of the things these titles have in common are pretty broad characteristics, like being in third person, being very pretty, having a good story, being a video game, but I think what really gets all these games grouped together is the huge amount of focus they put on feeling like a movie. Not just in the sense that they got really great stories, but in the techniques they use to tell their stories, the importance of cutscenes and dialogue and camera movement and acting. For all intent and purposes, these are basically animated movies that have become hybrids with video games. Most of these games have great gameplay too, but the stories are generally why you're there. They also really like these close-ass over-the-shoulder camera shots that annoy the shit out of me sometimes, but these games pull all of this off tremendously well, as most of the time I'm engaged in these equally as watchable and playable experiences. The PlayStation exclusives, better name pending, are masters of presentation. But there's a catch. You gotta understand, these games aren't just masters of presentation, they're also masters of illusion. Despite being these legendary, jaw-dropping blockbusters that are pushing the limits of what games are capable of, they're also quite contained and linear. They use a lot of little tricks in level structure, gameplay design, and delivery of information that keep you from ever really thinking too much about it though. Now there's nothing wrong with this. These very linear designs make sure the game constantly feels focused and fluent and keep you from messing up the story by being dumb. Plus you gotta understand, these games aren't just masters of presentation or masters of illusion, they're also masters of immersion. They've pulled you into these stories and captured your investment by showing you characters who are much more capable and worlds that are much more expansive and vast than they realistically are in-game. Again, this is something that only makes sense. With the insane amount of time that goes into the painstaking details of everything, it's crazy to expect the most freedom of any game, or the most choice of playstyle. This shit would never get made. And that's where the illusions come in. They help to keep players in a focused gamer mode, where the main interest is consuming the story, going along with the experience as it is, and where little imperfections aren't really noticed. And that's where Ragnarok breaks the formula. God of War Ragnarok is an ambitious game. It takes every attribute of the previous that was already considered near flawless and outdoes them. It's a deeply intimate story with bombastic spectacle and fierce combat, all of which is a little too much for the PlayStation formula. The sheer magnitude of scope, the literal awesomeness of the hype, it was too powerful for the illusions to handle. The game's too fucking cool, and now we're noticing things that restrict that coolness. Like the fact that Kratos is pretty inconsistent in things he can and can't do specifically with maneuverability, or the fact that the combat is broken up by small, less interesting forms of gameplay, like climbing up on lines, on walls, or brain-dead easy puzzles, or the fact that these people talk. Like a lot. Like a lot. Are any of these points on their own noteworthy? No. It honestly sounds like shit's being made up to be mad about. But again, the game's priority is presenting an immersive movie-game hybrid, and when that immersion's broken, not only do these little redirects and illusions not work, they can start to become a little irking. This isn't just Ragnarok, these are consistent restrictions in a lot of PlayStation exclusive games that feel much more pronounced in this game, because of how refined it is everywhere else. As insignificant as these complaints are, they feel like examples that draw from some bigger problems with a lot of these games' designs. I think one of these issues might be mobility, or how it's just not very fun to move around. The player character is usually a very stiff mass of muscle that is stuck to the ground and shakes your controller with every footstep, which is fine because that's how Kratos in the game are supposed to feel, and lends very well to the brutal combat, but not too much to exploration, which tends to be a big part of these games. The games are linear, yeah, but in the sense of having unlimited freedom or big open worlds where you can do whatever. Frequently along these linear pathways are much more open areas where you can explore to collect unlockables and goodies and junk. Ragnarok specifically has a bunch of mini open worlds that connect to a lot of linear pathways and levels. The big open masses themselves are mostly for scenery and talking while riding a boat or some dogs, and that's what makes this all really suck because these worlds are so vibrant and detailed, but trying to maneuver Kratos' heavy ass through these complex but well-designed jungle gyms can be mind-numbing, especially when exploring or backtracking, and that's where the small illusions start breaking and become irritating. Like, why are there invisible walls everywhere? Or why does Kratos need a specific new Mickey Mouse tool to get through this pathway when any normal person can just move around it? Or why can Kratos stab dragon scales with his blades but also need a specific marker to stab a piece of wooden platform? When you generally know how games work, these complaints are pretty nonsensical, but it's spawning from the idea that moving around is miserable sometimes. I wish I had other options. I think this could be negated if some options like jumping or swinging were added to loosen up the feeling. To account for jumping, area design would probably need to be a bit taller or something, but I think it could work. They've also already got these traversal points where you can swing from one platform to the next, just to give players actual control of it and allow them to make the jumps themselves. Loosening up the camera would also help with the feeling a bit. You know, let's bring it back a little bit. Please. Another problem I've seen people have is with the shallow side gameplay that isn't fighting itself. Things that mainly come with exploration or mobility, like puzzles that aren't really challenging, tedious gathering and collecting, or climbing along lined parts of walls for entire minutes. Now, I will say the climbing thing is pretty annoying. Like, at least add like a net or a messy piece of wall or something and let players move around freely on it, because this is not immersive at all. The others are fine though. They've definitely been worse than other PlayStation exclusives, and here, they serve their purpose of breaking up the main combat and story pretty well. Speaking of that, I haven't seen anybody complain about main combat, and that's for good reason. Ragnarok's combat is relatively the same as in the first game, but with an abundance of new options and hazards added, to a point where the most intense fights of the last game feel like every other fight here. It's so good, though it could benefit from better mobility too. Fighting arenas are much more open this time around, with interactables littered throughout and cliffs to dive off so you can do plunging attacks. The problem is though, I never really went out of my way to do anything like that, because breaking off from the main fighting to move around the arena was never something I wanted to do. Adding a jump button to allow for more air attacks or dodging specific new attacks, or adding a grapple point above some arenas could be really cool additions. Most importantly though, that camera again. Now, I know they brought it back a little bit and experimented a lot and feel that this is genuinely the best option. I don't care. I hate it. I will only be satisfied once I have complete view of the man's entire body, back, heels, and all. Now, the craziest but most common criticism I've been hearing about this type of game is that the characters talk too much. Characters most likely have something to say after every encounter, expanding on the story, continuing conversations, any other reasons people talk to each other. Some people don't like that and just want their characters to shut up while they play, saying the dialogue for cutscenes and all that. It's probably the one complaint I just don't understand at all. Listen. This game is stupidly gorgeous, running smooth as silk on this big-ass book-looking PlayStation, and the combat is addicting, and gripping, and satisfying, and brutal. All that said though, the storytelling of this game is by and far its strongest attribute. Despite this game being about the end of the fucking world, overall it's actually a lot calmer and less tension-filled than the last game. It's a deeply intimate and personal tale about people trying to find different ways to deal with events that are completely out of their control, and the damage they leave afterwards. It has much more emotional range than I was expecting going in. It's genuinely hilarious sometimes, but will also be somber and bittersweet in a lot of moments. It's got a tremendous amount of heart, before and after everyone starts killing each other, and it really pulls through because of the performances, and how well the cast can portray and transition through these webs of different emotions. All of this is to say that I can't understand people's complaint with talking, when it's just more of that good-ass story. It honestly feels like a reward after having encounters to hear these people talk some more. Even the simplest conversations hold a lot of subtext and tones of voice, choices of words, and so on.
How about peace?
I really can't get enough of the story. Until I can. Now, at a certain point, you're given control of not Boy anymore, and to be honest, a lot of the game's level design and natural barriers feel much more natural with Atreus, as you know, he hasn't killed an entire existence before. That being said, he doesn't have the same range of options as Kratos, so while he's cool to play as, gameplay is kind of being skewered in the moment. This also happens a lot in PlayStation exclusives and a lot of story-based games in general. In order to really make you pay attention to the most important and impactful story moments, gameplay will be kind of restricted, or at its least interrupting. This can also happen the opposite way around, where in moments where the story is at its least interesting, the gameplay will really show off. The problem with some of these Atreus sections is that, despite the restrictive gameplay, the story isn't always at its height here. These sections take time to build up really important and cool outcomes. Like a lot of time. Like a lot of time. Like hours. These sections are really fucking long, and while they're fine your first time through, I can see them becoming somewhat grating on repeat playthroughs. But when these sections pay off, they really go all out. Ragnarok does just about everything you could want right, with its very few, very short shortcomings being symptoms of the type of game this is. It would really help the next game to shake these shackles just a little bit. Just stop forcing us to the ground so much, give players some more leeway in how they move around, and zoom the camera out for the love of God!